Welcome, gentlemen, welcome all, welcome our audience, and I would like to invite you to the first lecture today.
Good morning. Good morning to everybody. I do apologize for not being with you today, and it's really pity to me of not being able of being in Krakow at this important meeting held by the Krakow University of Technology, National Institute of Architecture and Urban Planning. That I thanks for this invitation at such important Congress. I will try to explain the means that I will have for my speech in describing what the avant-gardes today is in the designing, or should be better, should be in the designing of the town. The process of making town, of course, is reflect the complexities of the civic situation which the society is dealing with, especially in these very difficult days. And I feel sorry for what is happening in one European country which is close to us, and I'm referring to the war in Ukraine, of course, and this makes very worrying about the future of our towns. Anyway, this is one of the contradictions of our days in which we have to deal with. The problem in which the architecture had to deal with, I think, is the losing of meaning of our way of living. The neoliberalism transformed our society into a sort of volunteer member of the capitalist system, and that probably makes did a strong transformation from people able living in acting by their willing into a sort of a product, a sort of goods. The slideshow that will pass through while I will speak are a sort of compendium at the idea of the what I think is the avant-garde of everyday living in our European towns. Our picture that they depict some urban situation of the eastern towns, actually are more about the Italian towns, but that we can find in several beautiful towns of Europe and of the eastern country. So in this increasingly contradiction of our contemporary society, those are inevitably reflected in the shape of our urban landscapes. giving rise to even more alienating places where the sense of estrangement is alive as ever in the consciousness of citizens. The various forms of protests put into action in an attempt to eliminate or reduce the damage are, on one hand, evidence of how the transformation of the place we live are increasingly divorced from their human and territorial context, while on the other they are affirm a new sensibility toward the public aspect par excellence, the city. The stage of the human drama has been transformed, which is the town, has been transformed in a relatively short period of time from a fixed stage full of customs and rules to a moving one in a continuous and rapid evolution, often not without painful contradiction. Cities change more rapidly than we can do, Victor Hugo said. Condensing into a single aphorism much of what has actually occurred in urban space, a phenomenon that has progressively accelerated from the Industrial Revolution today. The ongoing process of the modification of spatial relationships, which also occur in the ancient time, albeit in generally more reduced form, has involved increasingly varied dimension of part of cities, when not entire built realities. This event, which I have not always been able to provide answer bearing convincing proposal for the development of metropolitan landscape from form in the city, according to the vision of Oswald Matthias Unger, they did a juxtaposition of contradiction, a process which is more dialectical than linear. With its contradiction and discontinuities, but also not infrequently with its continuity, the complexity of the architecture of the city is thus the natural field of study and experimentation of theories of many architects attentive to the urban phenomena. The theme is however, that in search for a sharing of objectives or a social art, for which the question lies in the development of the tools useful for achieving this purpose. Architecture understood as a collective art is therefore simultaneously a reflection of and measure of it. In fact, as Henrik Petrus Berlage argued, and I'm quoting him, since architecture is the art of society, it is fatal that it reflects more than any other art the different spiritual and political orientation of society, also characterized by a slow trend. This orientation can lead to oppress and the laceration of society, or, on the contrary, to liberation and union. Architecture, like a barometer, will follow these changes. The other arts are also characterized by the prerogative of promptly expressing spiritual changes. It is when it happens on an individual and on a social level that therefore does not reflect the transformation of society, as architecture does. The examination of architectural works allows formulating a judgment on the spiritual contradiction of an historical period. As architecture is materialized spiritually, and stone are quite eloquent. Yes, the stones speak, and they are nothing more than idea materialized into an artistic form. For this reason, architectural art has an eternal value and monument arouse moving veneration in us. It is the monument that makes history, and it is history that makes the monuments. If we can still share this statement today, we must try to critically question the reality in which architects are called upon to work, and social framework, not without contradiction, in which their work is placed. The current impoverishment of the state of architecture and therefore of cities can be inscribed within a reference frame of a society described by Frederick Jameson, where the culture of a product as the sedimentation of knowledge and synthesis of a society has been transformed into the product for the affirmation of a community in which the dominant attitude of contemporary taste and fashion is a lifestyle marked by the increasingly rapid consumption of every object conceived. The prevailing trend of today's society is that everything is reduced to entertainment culture, with the consequential loss of sense of reality and, with its exemplification, its rendering into a simple appearance modeled by icons lacking of meaning. Accomplice to this attitude of reduction, which inevitably involved making architecture as a mere commercial product, is the mass information system which, by virtue of the culture of exhibition, has generally replaced the necessarily critical distance in the analysis of current production with a sort of cultural consumerism. Thus, taking up Jameson's theories, a consequence of this attitude, which is a formal characteristic of postmodernism, is the lack of depth and the expression of instances with a hasty character where the images repeats itself, losing its ultimate referent in an accumulant of the notion of history. Everything is lived according to an aesthetic vision of events, consumed without an expression of equidistance, judgment, and, according to the college technique, with heterogeneous citation. For the postmodern world, the decrease in the exteriority of experience means for Jameson a loss of radical past, or in the deepest reason of its history itself. This attitude places the individual in a state of bewilderment which prevents him from planning his own experience in the current terms. Therefore, for finding his own place within society and representing his complexity. For Jameson, it is precisely from this situation that the need of measuring itself against the irrepresentability must arise through a cognitive cartography that attempts to end the individual subject with a new, increased awareness of his position in the global system. Continuing his analysis, it has hope for a political and formative challenge. The new political art, if it is really possible, will have to seek to the truth of postmodernism, that is to say, to its fundamental object, the world space of multinational capitalism, and will simultaneously have to progress toward a new inconceivable way of representing it, in which we can begin to understand our position as individual and collective subjects and regain an ability to act and fight, which at present is neutralized by spatial and social confusion, he says. For those who work in the city or those called to design it, this new ability to act and fight can be understood as a search for a recomposition, albeit by episode, of spiritual confusion in opposition to the general flattening of contexts and forms of the city's architecture. There is therefore a pressing search for a way to operate within this contradiction of contemporary urban agglomeration, full of bewilderment and chaos, which seems to find the only answer to the babel of architectural languages that surround us today. On this topic, or on the relationship between memory and invention, Ernesto Nathan-Roger intervenes by arguing that he says, the ideal purpose for setting the contradiction between memory and invention is to absorb memory into invention so that the history of an object is identified by the history of a culture to the point of being an integral and inseparable part of it. It then goes to clarify, focus on the need to share intention with the society in which the ideas materialized, so that they are not perceived as a foreign bodies, he says. Here, the individual creator merges with the society from which he emanates and gives it an immediate representation. Individual memory becomes collective memory and serve as a link between the many inventions, so that it is indispensable to find the roots of new objects and ideas in the terrain of history, without which the masses will never be able to feel like participants in the act of individual emergencies. Cities all over the world, especially those with more intense and rapid renewal works, are unable to form a characteristic unit, because in Tokyo and Rome, the same buildings sprawl without any respect for the pre-existing environment ones. That is the specific character of their culture. They are artificially cultivated plants, transplanted without any concern for the climate, which distort the panorama of art as much as those of the landscape. The lucid vision of the condition of contemporary architecture is still very relevant today. Thus, the problem of the estrangement of today's cities and the disorientation of inhabitants, and even more than 40 years ago, does not seem to have found a solution. On the contrary, much of the architectural culture has made its objective situation its guideline principle. The unanswered question that Roger's theoretical assumption generates necessarily serve to question why these are still extremely topical today. Probably the new avant-gardes today are not for instance, I select few of the images that now are appearing on the screen, but are still the place that we're used to call like street blocks, squares, that still are part of the construction of the town. The neoliberalism architecture that you can see through this sample, but I could add more than this one. Can explain what is considered avant-garde today, but is not. This is just the adaptation of a willing that makes us not citizens, but just people that live mainly without thinking at their future. So thank you, and have a nice day. Bye.